All right, let's just jump right in. Welcome to our explainer on what I honestly think is the ultimate underdog of European history. We're talking about Luxembourg. It's a tiny, landlocked crossroads that somehow, against all odds, survived warring empires, literal invasions, and massive geopolitical earthquakes to become a modern powerhouse. It's an unbelievable story of resilience, and today we're going to map out exactly how they pulled the whole thing off. So here's the massive mystery we need to unravel. How on earth did a small piece of land, one that spent centuries just being traded back and forth like a chess piece by its much bigger, highly aggressive neighbors, manage to achieve such a crazy level of global influence? Well, as we'll see, they basically took their biggest vulnerability, their location, and flipped it into their absolute greatest asset. Second, just think about that number for a second. Today, Luxembourg is literally the world's second leading financial center for investment funds. The only place beating them in assets under management is New York City. I mean, for a country of this size, that is a staggering reality. It's like David beating Goliath, but with banks. But to really get how they built this modern financial juggernaut, we've got to go back, way back to the foundation.
Which brings us to their early days as a highly strategic medieval crossroads.
Now, the strategic value of this area, people recognized it super early. We're talking the 1st century BCE. The Roman Empire expanded right into the region and built up the roads because it was such a crucial trade route. But the real spark, the nucleus of the nation, happens in 9063 AD. That's when Count Siegfried acquired this rocky promontory known as Luxembourg. Honestly, it was a totally calculated move to grab a highly defensible, incredibly strategic spot. And from that one single fortress, a whole community blossomed, eventually gaining enough clout to be elevated to a powerful duchy in 1354. And almost immediately, this little territory started punching way above its weight class. By the 13th century, the House of Luxembourg had risen to massive prominence. By 1312, they'd already produced a Holy Roman Emperor, Henry VII. And you absolutely cannot talk about medieval Luxembourg without bringing up John the Blind. He was basically a legendary figure of medieval knighthood, famous for his chivalry, who eventually died at the Battle of Crécy in 1346. These guys weren't just participating, they were major players on the European chessboard. It proved pretty early on that their geographic size definitely did not cap their political ambition. Of course, being that strategically important made them a massive target, turning them into the ultimate prize of empires. If we look at two back-to-back eras of foreign control, the contrast is just wild. In 1443, Luxembourg gets absorbed into the Burgundian state under Philip the Good. And this was kind of a golden era. It brought centralized power, sure, but also a massive cultural renaissance and a boom in trade. But then, 1477 hits. Control passes to the Habsburgs, and Luxembourg is suddenly folded into the Spanish Netherlands. And while it did connect them internationally, the Habsburgs basically bled them dry with heavy taxes to fund their wars and forced the locals into military conscription. Just a totally brutal burden on the everyday people. So fast forward to the 19th century, and we hit a really painful but absolutely vital compromise. After the Belgian Revolution, the 1839 Treaty of London forced this massive geographical reshuffle. Luxembourg actually had to cede its western, mostly French-speaking territory to Belgium. They shrank significantly. But in exchange for giving up that land, they gained something priceless. They were officially recognized as an independent, perpetually neutral Grand Duchy. That treaty literally drew the modern borders we know today and finally set the stage for their real sovereignty. But that hard-won neutrality would soon be put to the ultimate test, surviving the world wars. That quote right there really captures the absolute heartbreak of 1914. When World War I kicked off, German troops completely ignored international law and invaded. Despite having legally guaranteed neutrality, Luxembourg was just powerless. They couldn't stop the German military machine from using their homeland as a giant transit route to the Western Front. It was a really stark, terrifying reminder of how vulnerable they still were. And tragically, history repeated itself a few decades later, but this time with a level of brutality that's hard to even fathom. On May 10, 1940, Nazi Germany invaded. And guys, this was not just an occupation. This was a full-blown annexation. They put a Nazi administrator named Gustav Simon in charge, and his one goal was complete, total assimilation. They banned the native language, they forced Luxembourgers to fight in the German military, and they systematically deported the local Jewish community to concentration camps. It was a calculated, ruthless attempt to just wipe Luxembourg's national identity off the map. But here is the most crucial part of that dark chapter: how the people responded. Despite facing terrifying risks and horrific reprisals, a fierce local resistance rose up. These people engaged in clandestine sabotage, they spread anti-Nazi propaganda, and they protected their cultural identity with everything they had, until the Allies finally liberated them in late 1944. The trauma of those years left deep, lasting scars, for sure, but it also forged this absolutely unbreakable resolve. They were never going to let their sovereignty be threatened like that again.
Which leads directly into their incredible post-war transformation into the engine of Europe.
What they did next is honestly a masterclass in economic survival. They executed this flawless three-step pivot. Step 1, they took Marshall Plan funds and aggressively rebuilt their steel industry. That became the heavy-lifting backbone of their post-war recovery. Step 2, they realized that the best way to prevent future wars was economic interdependence. So, in 1951, they became a founding member of the European coal and steel community. And then, step 3, knowing that the steel boom wouldn't last forever, they made this brilliant, incredibly agile pivot in the 1980s. They leveraged their favorable regulatory environment just to absolutely explode into the global financial sector. And you really see their outsized political genius during this era. Back in 1991, right as the Maastricht Treaty was coming together, Luxembourg proposed what became known as the pillar structure. This was an incredibly clever compromise. It balanced unified EU policies with the need for individual countries to keep their autonomy in sensitive areas like foreign policy. Once again, it proved that this tiny nation could step up, expertly mediate, and literally help draft the future of European governance. But all that rapid growth brings us to their modern identity and the unique challenges they face today. You can see the most obvious result of their huge economic boom right here in the demographics. Today, the population is essentially a 50-50 split, half native citizens, half foreign nationals. That is wild. This massive wave of immigration has been drawn in by the country's huge prosperity. Now, on one hand, it makes Luxembourg this incredibly vibrant, cosmopolitan place to live. But on the other hand, it creates a really complex modern challenge around cultural integration and figuring out how to maintain a cohesive national identity. And building on that massive demographic shift, they're dealing with some really pressing day-to-day issues. First off, the language situation. Luxembourg operates on a triglossic system, which is a fancy way of saying Luxembourgish, French, and German are all used pretty much every day. As you can imagine, that makes the education system incredibly tough to navigate for newcomers. Second, all this wealth has caused real estate prices to just skyrocket, creating a serious housing affordability crisis. And third, while finance made them rich, it also means their entire economy is super vulnerable to the wild, unpredictable swings of the global markets. Which leaves us with a really fascinating question to ponder. How is this ultimate underdog going to navigate its next big chapter? Think about it. They've survived warring empires, devastating world wars, and massive industrial shifts. Now they have to figure out how to balance their heavy reliance on finance with the urgent need for sustainable, diversified growth, all while making sure a massive foreign workforce feels integrated. Honestly, if their long history of resilience and constant reinvention is any clue, they're going to figure it out. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it really helped bring the incredible story of Luxembourg to life for you. Catch you next time.